Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very inspiring show coming right up with special guest Kristy Robinett. And Kristy's here today to share with us her new book, Journey to the Afterlife, Comforting Messages and Lessons from Loved Ones in Spirit. Now, Kristy is a psychic medium, international author, and international speaker. In addition to giving readings and teaching workshops, Kristy uses her psychic skills to assist with police investigations. She's also a media commentator and the author of several books from Llewellyn. So let's welcome to the show, Kristy Robinett.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, what a pleasure it is to have you here. And gosh, you've got a new book, which is always very exciting.
Yeah, I'm really proud of this one. I know we're not supposed to have favorites, but I think that this one topples the other dozen that I've written. This one, it gives a lot of answers to a lot of the questions that we have about the afterlife that I'm often asked on an everyday basis.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so why don't we start with your background a little bit for our listeners that are new? You know, how long have you been communicating with spirits?
I was a toddler. I was only 3 years old when I started to recognize that those so-called imaginary friends, not everybody was seeing them. And yet they didn't scare me. It wasn't a scary experience for the most part. And they were offering comfort, and they were offering love, and they were offering advice even at 3 years old. But I grew up in a religious, parochial upbringing that anything to do with the spiritual side was actually coming from the demonic side. And so I was dismissed at the messages that I was sharing with my family and kind of went in hiding with regards to all of it because that was a heavy load for me to carry, that nobody else was seeing them. And I was looked at by my siblings as being a little bit peculiar. Well, my parents too, as being a little bit odd because I was talking to what they thought were imaginary friends or ghosts.
Well, and it's so interesting how that happens so often with children, that parents either dismiss it because of religious beliefs or because, just to them doesn't seem plausible. But
Right.
Those communications really do take place.
It does, and I did it with my own kids, though. They would be talking, to the air, to quote nobody, and I'd be like, "There's no such thing as wait a minute. Why am I saying that? Why is there that knee-jerk reaction to automatically assume that what they're experiencing at that moment is their experience? It's not our experience, and we really shouldn't dismiss it." So I had to almost take the programming from my parents when I was parenting and put it aside. Kids are the closest thing that we have to heaven, except for those that are dying. So we've got one end of each spectrum. And of course, they're going to have their experiences with heaven because of that.
Yeah. And how that looks. And it's so interesting, people's experience are their experience. And, I think it takes just growing up a little bit to realize, what, I can have this experience and it doesn't matter what other people think or say, but as a kid, you don't really have that maturity because you're relying on your parents to give you information.
It's true. And I think even as an adult, we still want to find a tribe of people that understand us. There still is that feeling of I need somebody that gets me. And I think that social media has offered that, and podcasts and, conferences. And there's a lot of people that have, and reality shows, there's the good and the bad with the reality shows, but they have lent a lot of different experiences where people can say, well, I didn't really have that one, but I had one similar to that. And we kind of feel like we belong. That uniqueness, we're raised, you be unique. And oddly enough, everyone's like, no, you be exactly like everybody else. Mm-hmm. That uniqueness is scary to a lot of people.
Well, in your book, Journey to the Afterlife, you talk about terminated souls. What is that?
I do, yeah. I talk about some of the taboo issues that we don't really want to talk about. So terminated souls are aborted souls. They are those that might be medically terminated as well. And there's a lot of hype and there's a lot of guilt that's associated from mostly the moms. I have had some clients that have come to me that have been the dads But mostly it's moms that completed an abortion and they feel as if they've damned their child or that fetus, depending upon your religious belief, to some really dark place, and that they're going to follow, when it's their time. And so the experience, the stories that I received from these spiritual beings about their journey, and that's sort of what I share. It's different than the other books that I wrote because it's kind of like interviewing the spirit themselves and saying, what does your afterlife look like and what does it entail? And it's not a one size fits all. And that's what I'm trying to get through in the book.
Well, and I know you've got these great sections. Part 1's all about heaven. And on that topic, what are some of the beliefs that you've encountered in regards to heaven?
So that is my first question that I ask when I'm doing a session, or if I encounter a spirit, is, hopefully it's your heaven, what does your heaven look like? Mm-hmm. And every one of them is different. If somebody loved the experiences that we have, we'll kind of backtrack. The experiences that we have in this world, the things that we love in this world, we take to the other side. So if we love spiders, we're going to have an afterlife filled with spiders. Now, if you hate spiders here, your afterlife filled with spiders would be hell, and I don't want spiders in my heaven, so that's not on my list. But if you love, the beach, or you love the sunshine, or you love 75-degree temperatures, it's not necessarily the physical part of that, but it's the way that it makes you feel. And that's what you take in as that soul and spirit. If you love that busyness of New York City and the lights and, even the smells and, all of that, then that's what is going to be your heaven. So it's not everybody goes to one place and sings in the choir and, has what I was raised, to believe is what heaven entails, on that religious, standpoint. The way that they explain it to me is that heaven is what makes up of what the things that they loved here in the earthly plane, and they've taken those into the other side. Our soul and our spirit isn't our physical being. It's not our skin color. It's not our eye color. It's not any of that. It is everything that has to do with the things that we dislike, we don't like, our belief systems, and our memory bank of all of that. That is stored in the energy of our spirit and our soul.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so as we talk about life and death, heaven and hell, let us talk about, because I know when people go through their grieving process, there's a lot of things that sometimes people will say to them that's not really appropriate. What are some things that people should not be saying to someone who's grieving?
So we hear the cliches all the time, and I see it with my clients, and and I've done it myself. I'm the one that's writing, don't do this, don't say this. And I've done it myself because it's such a cliche, well, they're in a better place. Well, they're being taken care of. If they had lived, it would have been something terrible. You're stronger because of this, or you're so strong. And I get that a lot, the comments from those that have lost children, that people come up and say, if I were you, I would not be doing as well. And, these parents, look at me and they say, oh, I'm just trying one foot in front of the other. And sometimes it's a cha-cha. Sometimes it's a side step. Sometimes I'm falling down, but you just still have to move, in some way, shape, or form. And, or I don't even know if I could handle this, and we do it all the time. I don't think I could deal with it like you. And they're looking at us like, I'm not dealing with this. What part of am I dealing with? I'm in grief mode. I'm in numbing mode. So we say a lot of those cliches, and we do that with pets, and we do that with, with people, just the same. And it doesn't make us a bad person. It just, I think the best thing to do for someone who's grieving is to say, would you like to talk? Or they really need you after the funeral. So a month, 2 months, 6 months after the funeral, saying, hey, did you want to go out to lunch? Because I've been thinking of you. A lot of people avoid what they don't understand.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I know in your book you talk about heaven's timeline. And what is that? What is heaven's timeline?
Heaven's timeline is, and I in all my books, I kind of give different experiences with that I share different moments connected to that. When we cross over, when we pass away, and I'm not sure if this is what you're referring to, but when we pass away, we end up having to go through what I call angel boot camp. So we go through that life review. We go through all the things that we did in our life, the things that we didn't do in our life, the things that people that we made happy, the people that we didn't make happy, and all of that. And that's a lot we hear with those people that have had the near-death experiences that say my life flashed before my eyes. So we know that happens from those NDEs. And then we reunite with our loved ones on the other side. We decide what we want our job to be. It's not like going to the coal mine and shoveling coal. It's the things that professionally and the things that we love to do here in life, we take to the other side. So if we were a doctor or a physician here, we might decide that we're going to help guide those that are going through the things that was our specialty here. So everything that we do in our lifetime here isn't for naught. There's actually rhyme and reason to it. So if you're a musician here, you might end up, helping somebody or guiding somebody who wants to be a musician, that is in the physical plane. And we enjoy our heaven. We live. We actually, I always say that they live better than we live. And I love my job because I get to talk to really happy people, and most of those are those on the other side.
Yeah. Well, and what are some of the signs that our loved ones would give us to let us know that they're with us?
They give us things that make us pay attention, and yet we still discount them a lot of times. Yeah. So, cardinals and birds and nature and butterflies and clouds that look like, hearts, and we get phone calls from the other side. We text messages, which I know is kind of weird. They just manipulate the electronics. The light bulbs will pop. I've had the most peculiar ones that people have, said, like, they live in the city and there's not a flower anywhere, and all of a sudden, a petunia will grow between the cracks, and that was their mom's favorite flower, and knowing that's what that is. So they definitely try. Dreams are probably the most obvious, the visits that they give us, where they are so vivid and they're so detailed, and they should leave us feeling like we just spent that time with our loved one. So often we'll wake up from those and be sad because it'll be so real, but we, wake up and we realize that they're not in the physical any longer.
Now, do they have gifts to communicate with their loved ones that have passed?
Can you repeat that?
Does everyone have gifts that they can communicate with their loved ones in the past?
Absolutely. Yeah, I always say you don't need to see a medium to talk to your loved one. You just have to utilize all of your senses in order to open up the sixth sense. So if you're more auditory, you may hear a song on the radio that reminds you of your loved one. If you're more clairvoyant or a visual person, you may actually, see. You may have those full-blown, that they talk about in the paranormal shows, the apparitions that are standing by your bedside, or the shadows out of the corner of your eye. You may be more of, the sense of smell, and all of a sudden you smell the perfume or the cologne that used to be your dad's or your grandpa's, or the cigarette smoke or the cigar smoke. So absolutely, we just are so busy with our lives, right? We're on full speed ahead every day, all day, and then all night we're hardly sleeping. The population has sleep issues, so a lot of times they take something, a sleeping aid or alcohol or something to help sort of calm them. And that sometimes can create some boundaries as well, so that they can't necessarily get through. It's like a plexiglass that's between them and us. And they get frustrated because they know that we need those signs to help, reassure us that they're still there.
Yeah. Well, I know in your book you have this whole chapter on Together We'll Find Heaven. And I found it pretty fascinating, this story that you talk about of a girl who died in a really bad car accident with another girl that crossed the double yellow line. And I'd love for you to share that with us because it's not something that people would think about. I was like, wow, was not prepared for that story.
Oh my gosh. So I just got goosebumps because this is a terrible thing to say, but I wrote this book like 2 years ago. So I keep actually having to reread it to be re-exposed to it. But that story was and we often, I'll back up real quick, I know we don't have a lot of time, but we see these large kind of passings like September 11th or Gettysburg or something like that, where there's a large population of people that pass away. And so what we don't recognize, or sometimes we don't necessarily think of, is that all these people are trying to crowd to go into heaven. And we forget that it's a bunch of them that are trying to get into heaven. So sometimes they end up not crossing over because it's so confusing. And so that message, that story was like can I read a second from it?
Yeah, please do.
So I think it's chapter 6, right, that you're referring to. Mm-hmm. So it's like recently I had a couple who came to see me in my office. Their daughter Deanne had died in a tragic car accident. Another girl going the opposite way must have been distracted and crossed the double yellow line, running head on with their daughter. They were both pronounced dead at the scene. Once the officers had sorted out the scene, putting each driver with their correct car. Upon contacting their parents, it was discovered the girls had been best friends from elementary school. I mean, how horrific is that? I didn't know the details until after I brought through Deanne. I swear I was just driving. I promise I wasn't texting, drinking, or even looking down. And all of a sudden I heard a crash. And Betty and I were standing on the side of the road, she said. Is Betty with her now? If she is, we want nothing to do with her, Kim, the mother, frowned. Betty was standing next to Deanne, though, her head bowed in regret. Tell them I understand. It was terrible, and it was a stupid mistake, and my phone dropped, and I bent down to pick it up, taking my eyes off the road for a second. A second that ruined so many lives, Deanne's mom exclaimed after I shared the message. It was both of them that had to come through to help with that sense of forgiveness. And that was just forgiveness. If both of them could go to the other side together through all of that, they had come through to really help them through that forgiveness for that grief. And that's, again, if heaven can forgive, we can too. And as much as it's sad and as much as it's, a terrible thing, that's what happened with the story. And the story goes on, a little bit more, but they didn't need to pass away. They just didn't. But they did. Yeah. And it was all about forgiveness and finding her heaven. And Betty was, in return, there to help work on the forgiveness too. And it was important for that. So they ended up, the family did forgive. That family did get together and forgive one another in the only way that they could. There's still that grief that's going to stay with them forever and ever. Yeah. But it was a horrific scene. It really was sad.
Well, and it's interesting, you hear about this often when souls incarnate to, we all agree that we're going to help each other out with these different life lessons on the other side. And then we get here, it's like, wow, I'm here to help teach you more about forgiveness because you wanted to expand upon that and evolve upon that as a soul. But here we are on this earthly plane working on these things going, I don't remember signing up for this. This is really hard.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that anybody who's had a loss goes through the why me, phase. And, or why them phase. And I'm kind of unusual in that I don't stick with the whole everything happens for a reason, analogy. I think that's another kind of cliche that we use. But I do think that eventually the dots connect as to, how am I? And it's rarely to punish us. I've had people sit down with me and say, is this a karmic lesson? I've lost my entire family. In fact, I had one recently. I had a young lady whose daughter had tragically passed away. Her husband ended up walking away from the marriage. Her mom and dad both passed away right after that, and she was left alone. And she was struggling between committing suicide and still existing. And there was no living, it was existing. And I had to give her some help because I'm not a licensed therapist, because I was really concerned that she was going to go down that really dark path. And, but that's exactly it. She's like, I'm going to work, but I really honestly don't know what I'm doing. And what's interesting is she was a nurse. So every day, and she worked in the ER, and every day she was saving lives, and she wasn't even noticing that she was making a huge difference in other people's lives while she was existing.
Yeah. Grief is a very tough thing. And it seems like we are on an epidemic at the moment of people who, have felt like suicide is the answer when there's so much more that could be looked at. I mean, reaching out to friends, there's a suicide prevention hotline, there's all, working with a counselor and therapist, there's lots of different approaches to get through it, because, we all go through grief, and we all have hardship in our lives, but it's not the end game.
No, I just recently, last week, I lost a friend who decided to take her life. And I'm from the other side of it. Here's the author, the medium, and then the other side of the humanistic part of it. And I'm mad at her. She had everything in front of her. She had me. She could have reached out, and she didn't. And I did what most, people do, is I looked through her social media to see if there were any signs. And she had sent me a really lovely letter not long before, about 3 days before she took her life. And it was upbeat. Everything was upbeat. Thank you for doing this, and thank you. And her son had died from suicide 2 years previously, and she really hadn't gotten over it. But she has a daughter that is still young, that still needs her mom. And so I had someone say, well, has she come to you? And I said, I don't think she will, because she goes, I'm mad at her. I'm so mad at her. And I'll go through that forgiveness, once it's time. I know that she did what she wanted, but suicide is never the answer. It just isn't. And I talk about that in Journey, that, I was raised to believe that those that, I don't like the word, and I think that they're staying away from the word committed suicide now, because they're like, it wasn't committed, it was like died from suicide. That those that die from suicide actually, have a fast pass to hell, and that's what happens. There's no purgatory, there's no in between, there's no none of that. It's fast pass to shovel a hole, and that's not how I see it. But that doesn't mean that you also have a fast pass to heaven either. And I think I have some stories connected to that in the chapters of the in-between. And there's always someone that can help. But at that moment, it's such a dark place. It is.
Yeah, it really is. And it's interesting. A lot of times when people are in that place where they think suicide is the only answer, they don't realize the wake of pain that they leave with that.
No, and that becomes their purgatory. They then have to, part of that life review, like I said previously, is we have to then sort of look at, in that looking glass, at everything that we caused, that cause and effect of everything. And we have to see that pain, and we can't necessarily experience our heaven when we are seeing all of the pain. Now, the pain of the grief is different. The pain of, we were responsible for this, whether it's suicide or whether it's, drunk driving, or whether it's, slow suicide, where you're abusing substances. But it's all of those affect, because you don't have all of those shrouds that you've kept, around you. You have to see. You have to see, feel, experience all of that. And that sometimes, I don't want to do that. I want to have kind of a clear trunk of stuff that I'm lugging to the other side. I really don't. And are we going to have some stuff? Absolutely. But we don't have to, have really heavy loads. We don't. We have a choice with that.
Yeah. And to see what happens with that. Well, so let's talk about, so what happens when a soul has unfinished business? What does that look like?
That is a lot. When, I don't know if you remember the whole show Ghost Whisperer, that Jennifer Love Hewitt, Marianne Winkowski was the person that they kind of wrote that story around. She only sees souls and spirits that do not pass over. So if she sees a spirit, it's somebody who hasn't crossed. It's somebody who is how I refer to as in the in-between. Catholics refer to it as purgatory. To me, there's different layers of that make that up. But the in-between is not a dark place, but it's definitely a lonely place. And it's filled with kind of figuring out how to deal with that unfinished business so that you can cross over without lugging those trunks all the way up those steps, if you will. And I have had a lot of experiences with those, because that's why I do even paranormal investigations, is to help cross them over or to help assist them in getting to that space. So it's not the dark place, but it's sort of like they wander this place, looking for that light so that they can cross over.
Now, I know a lot of people will probably go, well, what about my pets? Where do my pets go when they pass?
I wrote a book that came out earlier this year. My publisher loves the word, afterlife. So all of my books have a theme. So it's Tales from the Afterlife, TAILS. And in it, and in that one, and in the one that came out the year before, Messages from a Wonderful Afterlife, I talk about pets. I'm not a pet psychic. So I felt a little bit hypocritical writing those books, those chapters. But I do see pets on the other side. I do see, because it's the thing that makes up the love that we have. And who are we to say that they don't have souls? That's from an upbringing, parochial upbringing. We're taught animals don't go to the other side because they don't have a soul. They're not made in the light of God. So that doesn't happen. But it does. It does. So our pets meet us meet us on the other side. They stay with typically a loved one that would love them as well. Although I do have a couple kind of quirky chapters and tales that talks about, dad's taking care of the cat that he hated, but, he's doing it because he loves his daughter. So that's why the cat's with him. But, so they definitely do go to the other side. And they also offer us messages and inspiration. And there's a lot of documentation that those pets from the other side have saved lives in this lifetime, just as our souls and our souls and spirits on the other side can do the exact same thing. They can be our 911 sometimes too.
Well, and when we talk about, I know in your book, so you also talk about communications with spirits and how we can open ourselves up to that. What are some ways that people can do that if they want to communicate with a loved one that's crossed?
See, that's the thing that most people want, that snap your finger, instant communication thing. And it's like going to the gym. You're not going to get rid of the weight or build that muscle mass unless you actually work for it. And the same thing is very similar with regards to, talking to your loved ones on the other side. So it is working for it. And how that happens is as simple as turning off the real world, turning off this world. Yoga, meditation, taking classes with those that are of like-minded vibrational, elements, so that you can raise that vibration, sitting down and journaling, continuously talking to your loved ones on the other side. It can be in your head. It doesn't have to be out loud. And building some sort of a translation with them, so they don't have the vocal cords like we do. So like I said, they typically will utilize the different senses to show that they're around. So, and I didn't even realize that I was doing this when I was younger, but I was building kind of a different language with them. And I'm more of a visual person. So I would be like, okay, if this is going to happen around Christmas time, show me a Christmas tree. Or if this is around fall time, let me smell those fall leaves and, that brisk air and, the apple cinnamon donuts or whatever. So I kind of built my communication with the other side. And then they were clear and concise, and they knew, and they still do, they know what to give me so that there's no misinterpretation with regards to it. It's timely. It takes a while. It's just like if you want to learn Italian, it's going to take a while for you to learn Italian, just like it's going to take you a while to learn how to communicate with the other side.
Yeah. Well, and your book, Journey to the Afterlife, has a lot of great information in it. Where can people connect with you and learn more about not just this book, but all the books that you've written?
Sure, they're all available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. There's a couple at Walmart and Target as well. And if you check online, there's some there. Llewellyn is my publisher, so they always have my books. And my website's KristyRobinett.com, and I have them there as well.
Well, Kristy, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you, as always, for having me.
Well, thank you, Kristy. It's been such a pleasure to spend this time with you, and I'm so glad we had the opportunity to talk about your new book, Journey to the Afterlife, Comforting Messages and Lessons from Loved Ones in Spirit. Again, you can visit Kristy's website at KristyRobinett.com. Her book is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie bookstores. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Thursday, Friday, and Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.